In this video, we're going to go over how to name some binary covalent compounds. Now these compounds are binary means two, because there is only two different elements in each of these compounds. They're covalent because both of these elements are nonmetal elements. Okay, that's what binary covalent means. So if you look at some of these examples right on this introduction page, PCl5, SiCl4, and IF7, these are binary, again, because there's only two different elements, and they're covalent because both of these elements are nonmetals. That's the requirement for covalent bonding. They're both nonmetal atoms. Okay. Let's look at some of these example names. We have sulfur tetrafluoride, dinitrogen pentoxide, tetraphosphorus hexoxide, and bromine trifluoride. You should have caught two themes here. On some of these compounds, there's a prefix that goes in front of these element names. Also, you should also notice that some of these compounds, actually all of them, they have a suffix. They have an IDE ending for all these names. All right, so let's go over some of these rules of what you're going to need to know to successfully name these covalent compounds. We're going to need to know all of these prefixes. All of them, please. So please get real comfortable with each of these mono, di, tri prefixes and the numbers that they correspond to. We're also going to need to know all of these IDE endings. So you should already kind of know them because of the whole ionic compound naming already, because these are the same IDE ending names. Okay, so just know that it's not going to be fluorine or chlorine or bromine. It's going to be fluoride, chloride, and bromide. So let's go to the first rule. The first rule is that the first element name is unchanged. However, the second element name, that's when you use the IDE ending. So notice in N2O7, the first element, nitrogen, it's just nitrogen. However, the second element is not oxygen, it's oxide. All right, let's go over the second rule. The second rule is that prefix go in the front. Okay, prefix goes in the front to indicate how many atoms there are for each element. So for our example here, there are two chlorines and three oxygens. So the prefix for 2 is di, so we put the prefix in the front. The prefix for 3 is tri, so we put the prefix tri in front of oxide. Okay, 2 chlorines, 3 oxygens. Here's the last rule, and the last rule is actually just two exceptions. So the exception is never to use the word, or the prefix rather. Do not use the prefix mono on the first element. Okay, just don't do it. And also, the second exception is that we don't want any oohs or ows in our names. Okay, so anytime you see that, just change it to an O. Just change it to an O. So our example here is CO, which you should already know. It's called carbon monoxide, or not already know, but be familiar with the term carbon monoxide. Okay, carbon doesn't have the prefix mono in front. It's just going to be carbon. Okay, even though there's one carbon, you don't use the prefix mono in front. Also, the second exception is used in this naming. You see how it says monoxide? Well, if you left it like that and you try to pronounce it, it would sound like you're saying monoxide, but it's actually monoxide. Okay, like we are comfortable hearing it. So any oohs or ows, just change it to an O. So it is carbon monoxide here for CO. All right, let's take a look at our first example. Now, our first example, we have 2 nitrogens and 3 oxygens. Let's take a look at the chart for right now. 2 nitrogens, 3 oxygens. Well, nitrogen is the first element, so we just keep it as nitrogen. Oxygen is a second element, so instead of saying oxygen, we would say oxide. Second element has an "ide" ending. Okay, what else? Now we're going to add prefixes. How many nitrogens? 2 nitrogens. The prefix for 2 is di, so we're going to put di in front of nitrogen because there's 2 nitrogens. How many oxygens? There's 3 oxygens. Now the prefix for 3 is tri. So we're going to put the tri in front of oxide because there are 3 oxygens. Okay, so the name really should just be dinitrogen trioxide. Is that really what it's supposed to be? Yes, perfect. Let's go ahead and go to our second example. In our second example, we have 4 phosphorus and 10 sulfur atoms. 4 phosphorus and 10 sulfurs. So the first element's name is just phosphorus. You just get it straight from the periodic table. Make sure you spell it correctly. The second element name is sulfur, but it should have an IDE ending, so sulfur would become sulfide. Sulfide. Okay, great. Now we need to do the second rule, which is to add prefixes to show how many of each element there are. There's supposed to be 4 phosphorus atoms here, and 4 is tetra. So we're going to put that prefix in front of phosphorus. So it's going to be tetraphosphorus. And how many sulfur atoms are there? There's going to be 10 sulfur atoms. And 10 has a prefix of deca. So we're going to put deca in front of sulfide because there are 10 sulfur atoms. And that really should be it. Tetraphosphorus decasulfide. So that is going to be our name, and yes, it is. Awesome. Let's go ahead and do our third example now. In our third example, we have, let's see, we've only got 1 phosphorus atom. However, we've got 3 chlorine atoms. So let's go ahead and take a look at our reference again. Now, I'm only going to put these references up for our learning here. Just know that you should be very comfortable with these, okay? So we have our first element, which is phosphorus again. That is just the name that you see on the periodic table. Phosphorus. The second element name is chlorine, but it's supposed to have an "ide" ending. No, it's going to be chloride now. And now we have to indicate how many of each atoms there are. There's only 1 phosphorus, so we are supposed to put a mono in front. But since this is the first element, we actually don't put mono in the front. Okay, do not put mono in the front. That's the first exception. So we're going to move on to the second element. There's 3 chloride atoms, and 3 has a prefix of tri. So we're going to put tri to indicate that there are 3 chloride atoms. Okay, so phosphorus, trichloride. Let's check to see if this is right. Yes, it is. Excellent. Let's go on to our fourth example. In this example, we have 1 carbon atom. We also have 4 fluorine atoms. So first element name is unchanged. Just write it straight from the periodic table, carbon. Second element name is fluorine, and we're going to have to change that ending to "ide." So it's going to become fluoride. And spelling is important here. Make sure you spell it correctly. We're going to go ahead and add our prefixes. There's only 1 carbon atom, so it's monocarbon. However, again, don't use the prefix mono for the first element. That's the exception. We're going to go ahead and put our second prefix, which is 4, which is going to be tetra. There's going to be 4 fluoride, so it's going to be tetrafluoride. Tetrafluoride. Okay, carbon tetrafluoride. That really should be it. Let's go ahead and check our answer. Carbon tetrafluoride. Excellent. Let's go ahead and move on to our final example here. Example 5. Here we have 4 phosphorus and 6 oxygens. Now phosphorus, the name is going to be unchanged. And oxygen is going to have an "ide" ending. It becomes oxide. And now we're going to add prefixes to indicate how many elements there are. there are 4 phosphorus atoms, so 4 is going to be tetraphosphorus. And we're going to now have 6 oxygen atoms. 6 oxygen atoms. 6 has a prefix of hexa, so we're going to write hexa in front of oxide. Tetraphosphorus hexoxide. Now, it does sound a little bit weird here. It's because there is an AO right here. Anytime there is an OO or an AO, you actually want to just change it to an O. So instead of saying hexoxide, we want hexoxide. So I'm gonna cross this out and write hex oxide. Again, just change it to an O, right? So this name should be tetraphosphorus hexoxide. Let's go ahead and check our work. Tetraphosphorus hexoxide. Excellent. All right, and that's really all there is to naming binary covalent compounds. However, you do need to make sure you're really comfortable with the prefix list and the "-ide ending list. Okay, the prefix list and the "-ide ending list. Also, there are 2 exceptions. Do not use mono in the first element. And anytime there is an oo or an ow, just change it to an o. Okay? All right. Go ahead and try your practice. And if you don't get it right on the first time, just make sure that you resubmit it until you are correct.